So what are intercepts of a straight line? So we sketch a straight line, and the intercepts are the points where the graph of the straight line crosses the x-axis and crosses the y-axis. The point where the graph crosses the x-axis is called the x-intercept, and the point where the graph crosses the y-axis is called the y-intercept. So let's think about this point, for example, where the graph crosses the y-axis. Before we do that, let's think about how we graph a point on the coordinate axes. So here we have the point x, y, and we're going to graph this point. So the x coordinate is 2 and the y coordinate is 3. So let's start with the x coordinate. We always begin at the center, which is the origin. The x coordinate tells us how far we should move in the horizontal direction. So here it says +2 is the x coordinate. So this tells us to start at the origin and move to the right by 2 units. So we stop here at 2. Now, the y coordinate is 3. The y coordinate tells us how far we move in the vertical direction and which direction to move. If it's positive, we move up, and here it's +3, so we move up by 3 units. So that's 3, and that's how we plot the point 2, 3. The x coordinate tells us the movement in the horizontal direction and the direction of the movement as well, whether it's to the right or left. And the y coordinate tells us how we need to move, or how far we need to move in the vertical direction. Now suppose a point, let's get back to the first graph. Suppose a point lies on the x-axis. So for example, -3. If it lies on the x-axis, we start at the origin and move to the left by 3 units. So the x coordinate is -3. But notice that this point sits on the x-axis, which means it neither moves up nor moves down. So there is 0 vertical movement. So the y coordinate is 0. Now let's look at the point 2 on the y-axis. So we start at the origin, we move up by 2 units. So this tells us that the y coordinate, since it's a vertical movement, the y coordinate is 2. But the point remains on the y-axis, which means it doesn't move to the left and it does not move to the right. There is 0 horizontal movement, which means the x coordinate is 0. So if a point is sitting on the y-axis, we can be sure that its x coordinate is 0. If it sits on the x-axis, we know for sure that its y coordinate is equal to 0. So this is what we use when we find the x-intercept and the y-intercept of a given line. So suppose I have the line 2x plus 3y equals 12. Now, if we want to find the y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. So the y-intercept sits on the y-axis, which means its x coordinate is 0. So we plug in x equals 0 and we find y. That's how we find the y-intercept. So plug in x equals 0 and next solve for y. So 2 times 0 plus 3y equals 12. 3y, so 2 times 0 is 0. 3y equals 12. Y equals 12 divided by 3 when you divide both sides by 3. So y equals 4. So what this tells us is that the y-intercept is equal to 4, which means the point or the graph crosses the y-axis at 4. So 0, 4 is the point on the y-axis, and that is 4. Now let's find the x-intercept. So we have 2x plus 3y equals 12. In order to find the x-intercept, remember that the x-intercept is a point on the x-axis. That's where the line crosses the x-axis. So on the x-axis, the y-coordinate is 0 because there's only horizontal movement. When you start at the origin, you're still on the x-axis if you've made horizontal movement and 0 vertical movement. So that's why we plug in y equals 0 first, and then we solve for x. So 2x plus 3 times 0 equals 12. So 2x equals 12. We divide both sides by 2, which means that x is equal to 6. This tells us that the x-intercept is at 6, 0. 0 because it's on the x-axis. So let's just say this is equal to 6, 0. So this is where the line crosses the x-axis, and this is where the line crosses the y-axis. We draw a line through it, and that's the graph of the given line. So just remember, for the y-intercept, plug in x equals 0 and solve for y. And that tells us where the graph crosses the y-axis. In order to find the x-intercept, plug in y equals 0 and solve for x. And that tells us where the graph crosses the x-axis.